Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here today, and for everybody that's on Facebook and YouTube Live. Today, we have a special guest. We have Taylor Burks, who's a candidate for the 4th Congressional seat for Missouri. So we're very excited to have him here. I wanted to have him talk a little bit about his campaign and also his affinity for crypto and Bitcoin, because he's a big supporter. We met a few months back, and very impressive in his knowledge in this space. And you know, for me and my team and my community, we're always looking to support somebody that understands blockchain technology and crypto. And I think Taylor is one of the few people that know more about it than I do. So yeah, that's what really impressed me and my team about him. But I wanted to introduce him and like I said, just talk a little bit about the history of how you got into this space and also the seat that you're running for.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Taylor.
Good to be here. I'm Taylor Burks. Hello to everybody who's online as well. 15-year Navy vet, 5th generation Missouri farm kid, and a former county clerk over in Boone County, where I ran elections in Missouri's 4th largest city. So I won't bore you with campaign details because I know that a lot of people here care about this as an issue, as do I. But I think that we're in an exciting time politically because you see more and more people who are in politics engaging the crypto community, probably for their own interests. You certainly see candidates that think that there's an opportunity to fundraise and get capital for their campaign who suddenly become pro-crypto or pro-Bitcoin. And I say, welcome to the club, but you also have to challenge them with why and how they are, where they are with their thought process. Not everybody's created equal when it comes to being able to talk about the policy implications of federal regulations or deregulation as it relates to cryptocurrency. I think I told the guys when we met in Kansas City a few months ago, my personal opinion is that crypto is actually one of the most regulated assets in the country today because there's a lack of uniformity. So you have a number of federal agencies, whether it's the SEC, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, the IRS has tax treatments on economic activity in crypto. A number of federal agencies that, barring a uniform federal policy coming from Congress or coming from the executive, these agencies all determine their own treatments of cryptocurrency. And so one of the challenges for people who want to get into federal policymaking is what can we do to create a simpler treatment of cryptocurrency at the federal level so that we are not stifling in the United States this innovation, this technology that really is the future of not just currency, but economic activity, I think, for the long term. So I myself have been in crypto for several years, got into the space 5-6 years ago, had some friends from high school that were following it pretty early on. They're in the IT world, in the big tech, you might say. And so they were tracking Bitcoin and cryptocurrency pretty early on. I'd gotten exposed to the idea a couple of years after the white paper came out and then decided to take the plunge, like I said, 5 or 6 years ago, which has been life-changing for us. It's because of crypto, Bitcoin specifically, that I've been able to take a year off from my career. I'm a supply chain professional, but take that time off to run for Congress now that there's an opportunity to do that. And we're doing, I think, exceptionally well in our campaign in Missouri's 4th Congressional District to be a serious candidate, somewhat of an outsider, but to lead the field in fundraising, lead the field in endorsements, and have the issues that I can talk about be issues that are important to the 4th, I think is just a huge blessing to us. So that's just kind of me in a nutshell. I always like questions, but I can talk about specific ideas or specific thoughts that you guys have for a federal policymaking perspective, if that's what you guys want to do. Yes, sir.
Two of the favorite processes or benefits of crypto that you try and spill upon your future brethren inside of government.
Yeah. Sure. I touched on the first one. I think that we need to have some uniform treatment of cryptocurrency, whether it's something as simple as definitions and you know, Bitcoin and crypto writ large, I think, are 2 separate treatments. We have to consider Bitcoin for you know, functionally the currency that it is, and other types of crypto I think are closer to securities, what the definition of securities are. And so if we can simplify just that, I think that would be huge from a policymaking perspective. The second part of it is I do think that Bitcoin allows average people, Americans, whomever, it doesn't have to be Americans, but for us here in America, it allows us to decouple our own financial futures, our own economic capacity or activity from Federal Reserve and terrible fiscal policy or monetary policy. And so again, if we can recognize that Bitcoin is that future, it's a decentralized way for us to disengage from terrible policy making. I think that redirects how we do things in DC. If we're no longer able to say a dollar's worth this much, or we're going to print $10 trillion in the last 3 years, and creating the economic conditions that we are just now seeing between inflation, supply chain disruptions, all of these, I think, are downstream effects of some terrible fiscal and monetary policies that we've seen. And Bitcoin frees us from those decisions, the results of or consequences of those decisions.
Question. So, what do you see? I'm asking this question to you. You're running for office.
Yeah.
Okay? So, what's your view on cryptocurrencies' place in the global economic community?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm actually specifically asking this because USA is built on basically immigration, immigrant like me. Okay.
Yeah.
And because people from all over the world are coming here, like to come here, and the money exchange hands is what most active market in the world, right?
Yeah.
So I'd like to see how what's the view on this and how cryptocurrency will play a role in our community, in our meaning that the U.S. economy,
right?
I
agree.
Yeah,
so we're already seeing it with remittances south of the border. We see immigrants who work here who support their families, Central or Latin America. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, in the larger sense, allow people to move their wealth across borders without either corporate intervention that includes fees or hidden taxes, or federal government intervention. I think we're also seeing in Eastern Europe, a lot of Ukrainians or Russians, depending on which perspective you have, but a lot of them are victims of global power competition, and that's what's happening in Eastern Europe. Average people over there shouldn't be the ones who are suffering economic devastation because of terrible decisions from Vladimir Putin or people in charge over there. And so you see average people able to move their wealth or their assets or their economic activity out of something that's state controlled into something decentralized like Bitcoin. And so I really do think that this is an opportunity for people to be in control, for people to determine their own economic destinies, and the capacity in the crypto sphere to do that is enormous. We don't even know. Like, this is a 10-year-old technology. We've just scratched the surface. We're still in concept phase, early adoption phase for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And for us to imagine what that's like, not just 10 years down the road, but 20, 50, 100 years down the road, I think is mind-boggling. But that's how technology works. I mean, we're at the point where we are still using, in some sense, paper, which is a 5,000-year-old technology, but using paper as the foundation for our current currency. And we're in the digital age. And so for us to imagine what the applications are for digital currency like Bitcoin is just mind-boggling at this point, but it is the future.
Isn't that the double-edged sword though? Because U.S. currency is key as U.S. dollar is key currency right now, right?
Yeah.
So we don't want to, give it up, of course. Now,
Yeah.
Right? So I don't know. I've been watching and thinking about this for the last couple of years really actively. And depending on how this cryptocurrency will play the role in the global economy, you probably compete with our key currency. I mean, U.S. dollar. So what do you think? I'm just
well. I mean, there's always pain when you transition from one technology to another. Like, I would not have liked to have been a buggy or carriage maker 150 years ago when cars came out. But it doesn't mean you stop innovating with cars or different forms of transport. And it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, we're seeing a transition process now. As I said, we're so early with adoption for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as a technology, not just as an asset or a security or how we can exchange this. Just as a concept, this technology is so new and so fresh. And so, we're going to continue to transition, I think, over the next several years. And the big political factors or events that we're seeing in the globe today, I think are going to accelerate this transition. People are recognizing that, again, I'm looking at Eastern Europe, the U.S. military has been tracking what Vladimir Putin has been doing with his troops for months now. Massing troops in Belarus and Russia. We think that Vladimir Putin is obviously the bad actor in this situation. But regardless of that, as I mentioned before, citizens of Russia or citizens of Ukraine ought not be the victims of this great power competition. And so this transition, I think, is going to be accelerated because of the circumstances that people can look and say, hey, statism is obviously punishing people who have no control or influence over big geopolitical actions. And so that's where we're moving. And I think it's a good trend for us, those of us who believe in individual liberties and our ability to influence our own destinies.
So what's your evolving into that? What's your stance on the push for the, ESG, for big corporations to social credit score, things that are kind of rolling out? Obviously, that's a big deal for, personal freedoms and, freedom to travel and so on. Commerce. So,
I think that movement is just the most recent trend on how big corporations can signal their affinity to a niche group. I think that Elon Musk had a tweet maybe a month ago about it. Like, this is just the latest trend in corporate woke ideology and isn't really a reflective of what, again, economic activity ought to be for those things. So I'm pretty dismissive of it. I don't think that we ought to engage with that from a federal policymaking perspective. I think it makes us less efficient when we do those things. And if a corporation or organization or business wants to adopt these policies of their own volition, fine. I mean, that's the nature of free enterprise or private enterprise. But end of the day, if we start embedding those in federal policy making and punishing innovation just because it doesn't meet this arbitrary score, then we're going to become one of these directed economies like China or Russia, where an ideology or a partisan ideology becomes the lodestar for how we build and develop technology. And there's a reason the United States is far advanced of countries like China and Russia. It's our ability to innovate. And when we start having, again, these arbitrary influences on our innovation, we degrade that ability. The free market is so innovative. And if we adopt things that decrease or degrade that ability to innovate, we're going to be worse off for it.
Are you seeing, being that your background's in farming, are you seeing any push for that? Obviously, working in that industry or most of your life, working with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, how they work with farmers to produce and not to produce. I mean, would there be a push? Would there potentially be a push in the farming industry for something like carbon credits?
I think there is, and I think that we saw it 12 years ago with cap and trade. That's kind of the start of it, before ESG was a term or an idea that progressive policymakers were pushing. Farmers are pretty resistant to that type of change or those ideas. The other thing is, with the supply chain disruptions, with food shortages, food price increases, inflation as a whole, I think we're probably going to see less pressure to mess with the food production side of what the United States does than we would have, say, 3 years ago when the economy was booming. If Joe Biden and his team were in charge then, I think that we would have seen that. But we're at a moment right now where we have a lot of shelter for agriculture to do those things. Not to say that it wouldn't happen. We solve a lot of these local crises in the short term, and you can bet your bottom dollar that these people are going to come in and say, waters of the U.S., that rulemaking authority starts getting pushed a lot more aggressively than it is right now. And again, I think that discourages some of our strengths here in this country when we allow those things to run amok. Got a question back here?
Yeah. As a dude that left his supply chain job thanks to crypto for a year to run for politics, how would you describe to just a dude on the street crypto? I am super curious because I've heard so many definitions over the last 40 weeks that I have been in crypto.
Yeah.
And I that's what I want a politician to grab like a football and just start plowing through and showcasing to people.
You know,
because there's so much value in it, and go.
right. My frontline point when people are like, oh, I don't understand Bitcoin or I don't understand crypto, I will never get into it. They're like, you can't even touch it. You can't hold it. How can there be something that's not a physical asset? And my first point is always, how do you use your bank account? You know, are you transferring stuff between your bank account for automatic bill pay, using your credit card? These are things where you never physically touch your asset, US dollars, underlying what that is. And so why should Bitcoin be any different? We've already moved to that sphere, but Bitcoin is a technology where you're securing the value of that because it's finite. You know, it allows us to say this is all that there's ever going to be. As we mine it or produce it, this is the cap for what that is. So there's always that intrinsic value for Bitcoin based on those inputs. But my basic point and how I convinced my parents to start, you know, getting into Bitcoin and investing or putting some of their assets into Bitcoin is you never touch the dollars that you're transacting with your Visa or with your bank account when you make payments that way. So why should that be the hurdle in getting into Bitcoin or cryptocurrency? And then once they get to that point, the curiosity is to inform themselves, to educate themselves on what it actually is, rather than trying to educate them from the beginning on what Bitcoin or blockchain technology are.
So media talks about how Bitcoin mining is the most terrible thing in the world. So I wanted to get your point of view on that.
Yeah. So for the Navy, 15 years, I've been a logistics guy, supply chains, but I specialize in energy, fuel distribution for the United States Navy. The reality is there's so much excess energy production in the world. The problem is distribution of that energy. And what Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as a whole allow us to do as economic actors is to convert that energy into something else locally where it's produced. We're not increasing energy production for Bitcoin. We're consuming energy where it's more locally sourced. And to me, that's far more efficient than trying to transport oil from Canada to, you know, Texas for refinement or from Russia into Western Europe. Like, that's a terribly inefficient, and the geopolitical consequences of that are very real. We're seeing it today. If you only look at it in terms of carbon consumption or production, output, whatever that is, yeah, you're going to think that it is inefficient and not green. But the reality is, again, you're converting what's already being produced from energy into something else that's far easier to transfer and move than the energy, the physical source that goes into the input for mining anyway.
As a source of energy itself.
Correct.
So do you think there's some stuff floating around out there from a gentleman, Jason Lowery, talking about how we potentially could be moving from a kinetic wars to energy wars around the globe?
Yeah,
I see that movement, or
I have, and I'm a big fan of Jason Lowery. Some of the ideas that he's put out there for his master's thesis. He's a U.S. Air Force officer at MIT right now, active duty, who's using cryptocurrency and Bitcoin more specifically to underpin some of his master's thesis or his ideas about national security. And his point is exactly that. Right now, we conduct so many operations. War today is conducted to defend physical spheres. And when we move wealth or when we move assets out of the physical world into the digital world, you're no longer dealing with lives or physical assets to defend that wealth. It instead becomes a cyber warfare realm, which, as imaginary as that sounds, or as otherworldly as that sounds, it's not costing lives to defend that wealth. It's costing energy, and it's costing technology and expertise to defend that wealth. And so warfare moves out of the physical world into the digital world when we move our wealth or our economic activity out of the physical world into the digital sphere. And so I think there are a lot of curious ideas. I mean, this is a concept that's just a couple of years old. So there's going to be a lot written about warfare strategy based on this. But I think it's pretty telling. We can say that Bitcoin actually makes the world a safer place, regardless of what you feel about the for that.
So I know we've only got a couple more minutes, but I've got a couple of questions from the chat, if you
great.
don't mind. So one of them is, Do you have any ideas on what you might suggest as far as incentives or policy to help small businesses venture into crypto?
Certainly tax treatment for crypto is something that federal and state policymakers can change so that we do incentivize this move into the digital world. And I would say we ought to incentivize it. We've already incentivized internet economic activity. So many like Amazon or online shopping writ large has become a thing because of tax treatment on the internet. We wanted to incentivize that activity. This is something that, again, makes the world safer, makes the world greener. Federal policymakers ought to recognize that and move tax treatments towards simplification or certainly advantageous incentivization of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency.
Great. One more. How will the United States' central bank digital currency work in an environment with cryptocurrencies? Aren't they competitive goods?
The point that I've often made, let's rewind a year or two. Everybody's heard about China repeatedly banning Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. It became, over and over cyclical of like, oh, this is the death of Bitcoin. China as a great power in this world is trying to ban Bitcoin. And that's so terrible. And it's not because they didn't believe in it. It's because they understood it and believed in it so much. They wanted their own centralized digital currency. So having a centralized or a digital dollar, I think, is also something that shows, just proves how effective this is as a technology. That doesn't negate the fact that Bitcoin is the decentralized cryptocurrency. And so a digital dollar becomes just another tool of the state. I don't think that we can discourage that, but it doesn't replace what the value of Bitcoin is, which is not state controlled.
Do you ever see our government purchasing Bitcoin?
I understand that, until recently, every Bitcoin that the United States government seized or took control of, we then auctioned off. And I do think that we get to a point where federal governments, you already, El Salvador, there are a couple other countries that have been in talks about treating it as legal tender and as their reserve currency for their central banks. I think pretty quickly we get to that point. Major companies are holding it on their balance sheet now. You guys know the ones. Was it MicroStrategy, PayPal, Square? You list all of these major companies, and that's only going to continue to grow. These companies are not going to divest themselves of that. So yes, the short answer is yes. Central governments are going to start holding Bitcoin as a reserve currency or in their foreign reserves because it's like gold. Like, the question would be, are countries going to hold gold in their reserves? Well, they do it now, and so why wouldn't they treat Bitcoin the same way?
Sure.
I have a question, sorry, for someone that failed high school government. Could you explain to me where the 4th congressional district is?
Yeah.
And how it fits into?
Well, we don't actually know.
So, where are we at, right?
Yeah, so we're at a point where we have maps that are in the state legislature. They've not passed even our congressional district for the next 10 years. So every 10 years with the census, you redraw districts. We don't even know where the 4th district is right now. The most current map has me from Columbia stretching to Kansas City, so west, Columbia, mid-Missouri, west to the suburbs of Kansas City. And then I pick up the 2 military bases, which is why I talk a lot about national security. That's my background, but it's also important to our district.
Cool. And then you mentioned like cash earlier. Do you have concerns in a cashless society about like privacy implications?
Sure.
Especially with like the traceability of
Sure.
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
In and of itself.
No, I'm terribly concerned about privacy, but I have been for a long time. This is not a new concern with Bitcoin. If you're concerned about privacy, the digital age is not for you. There are things that you can do to increase your protection online, but at the end of the day, when you participate in this sphere, whether it's social media, already online banking, online shopping, just having an online presence, you're at risk. Your personal privacy is at risk, and I don't think that this is any different than where we've been for a long time now.
Do you accept your contribution in the form of crypto?
We do.
currency right now?
Yep,
Oh, okay.
TaylorBurksForCongress.com.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
You can donate traditionally, or you can donate with cryptocurrency. I know Bitcoin's doing really well this week, and so if you want to share a little bit, it'll go a long way for us.
All right.
Great.
Thank
All right, nice to meet you guys. I'll be back.
Today's also his birthday,
Yeah.
so he spent the day with us. So we want to thank you for being here at Crypto World.
Yeah.
And like he said, if you guys want to help out, even though we're not in this district, we could still help by we donated to help with his campaign because we know that having somebody like him at the White House is going to be very important.
In the Congress.
Yeah,
Congress.
Congress.
Well, maybe why not in the future?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Future. Yeah, but next week we have Hanko coming with 5 South Korean companies that'll be presenting. So be sure to come to that event. I think 3 out of the 5 are crypto or blockchain, related. So, but outside of that, also we have an announcement that next week we're also going to do our WeFunder live on next Tuesday during the Crypto Over Coffee. So we'll send you guys information on that. But outside of that, thanks for being here today, and we'll see you guys next week.
Great work.
What's the refunders live?